One of the ways to propagate plants is through cuttings, and that's what this segment will be on. If you see me doing this because we've had some rain, there's a lot of insects flying around, including mosquitoes, so try to ignore all this happening. Cuttings is where you get an exact replica of the plant that you're cutting. Seeds may or may not, it depends if the plant was a hybrid, but a cutting gives you that exact replica. So I have this lipstick salvia here, and I'm going to talk through the process, and then I'll show you some video clips I'll explain in a minute. When I propagate a plant, I need to encourage the plants to grow roots, and those roots are going to grow at a node. This is a node right here where the leaves are. This is a node. This is a node. I need a node so the roots will grow from that node. If I cut right here in the middle, roots are not going to grow from this stem. Roots are going to grow from here, not here. So in this plant here, this beautiful lipstick salvia, I don't want these flowers when I'm propagating plants, because right now the plant's putting all of its energy into producing these absolutely beautiful flowers. So in making a cutting, first I'm going to cut these flowers off right here. I'm going to cut them off. Now I need some leaves for the photosynthesis process, but I don't want too many leaves, because a lot of leaves is going to require a lot of transpiration, is the fancy word, a lot of transpiration from the roots, but there are no roots because I just took a cutting. So I don't want a lot of leaves, I just need a few leaves, just a couple leaves to start that process, to keep photosynthesis going and to encourage root growth. So if I cut this off, because I don't want to have a flower there, I have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there are 10 leaves up here. That's way too many leaves. First off, this leaf's way too big. So I'm going to cut the big one off, I'm going to cut the big one off, and that will leave me these, let me see if I can do this, these 8 smaller leaves. And I'll decide which of those I would keep and which ones I would not keep, because I don't really need all 8 of them. So the flower is cut off. I have the leaves trimmed back to the minimum. Now I would like to have at least 2 nodes, but these nodes are pretty far apart, so I'd have to think about it. Here's one node right here. Here's a second node. Usually I would have 2 nodes, but given the distance, the inner node length here, I'd probably go with 1. But the way it would work is I will cut this off here. I would remove these leaves, and I would cut it at an angle, because when I cut it flat, that's all the surface that's going to be exposed to the soil and the rooting hormone for growing more roots. But if I cut it at an angle, I have a larger surface area, of that area right here where those roots are going to grow. So I would cut it at an angle, dip it in my rooting hormone, and then put it in my pre-moistened soil. That is how a cutting is taken. And sort of referring back to the introduction segment, you need to have a clean environment to work in. As I pointed out, I work outside, but I can make sure that my table is clean. I can make sure that the soil is clean. I can make sure that the clippers I use are clean. I can make sure that the rooting hormone I use is clean. I can make sure the pot I use is clean. And the water I use, rainwater, the barrel is just right over here to the left of where I'm sitting. Those things I can control, and the cleaner it is, the higher the possibility of the cuttings actually taking and developing roots. This segment that I'll be showing you is cut into various parts, and it may look a little awkward. There's going to be a lot of repetition because I recorded it at various times. I recorded it, and then I showed the plants a little bit later on. I showed you which plants took and which plants didn't take. Not all the plants made it, because in February we had a kind of a surprise. We had very cold temperatures, too much snow, and absolutely no electricity. So a lot of my cuttings did not make it. So the ones you see, they may not have survived. But let me show you what the cuttings do look like. This is an embray salvia that I made a cutting of about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Taking it out of the pot, you can see that it has developed a pretty decent root system. And this is within the last month. Here are some cuttings from Nueva Leon salvia. 3 very small ones. See, I don't have very much leaf going on here, but these were only cut April the 7th, so they're too early to really show anything. The last cuttings I made were some Mexican marigolds. These were done just really a couple days ago, and it's interesting. Look at how this is the same plant. This one is really doing quite well. These look like they're struggling a little bit. In propagating through cuttings, in any propagation, what can you learn from your work? This is a thicker stem. It's stronger. It can hold these leaves better. It looks like this was a smaller stem and it just can't handle the weight of those leaves. I'll probably lose a lot of these. So what I'm going to do is this afternoon, I'm going to take some more cuttings and I'm going to try to get these thicker stems, and I'm going to cut back a little bit. I think I left too much leaf on there, but this is something that you learn. And I'm showing this because sometimes I'm not as successful, but I learn as I propagate. So in this segment, it's going to be a variety of clips taken over different periods of time, spliced together. There's going to be some repetition, but hopefully, and there's going to show you some failures, but hopefully you will get an idea of how to do cuttings from plants for plant propagation. So here we go. Here are the tools of the trade. I have my clippers, my knife if I should need it. I have my rooting hormone. Rooting hormone comes in powders. It also comes in a liquid in the Bexar County Master Gardeners and our plant propagation segment of our basic Master Gardener intern. We use a powder that you blend and it becomes more of a syrup, and Luke Kellogg, who's our master plant propagator, that's what he prefers. I got this because they had it at the store. It's a powder, and I have mixed the soils. This is just a general peat moss, perlite, vermiculite. These containers, I'm going to put the more native plants, and they are primarily perlite and vermiculite. Not much peat moss at all in here. And then these are where I'm going to put my porter weeds, and they again are primarily perlite, vermiculite with some peat moss. And so we're going to plant each one of these plants, sometimes 2 or 3 in each one. The square ones we're going to put in plastic bags. That's one thing that they taught us at the Tarrant County Master Gardeners, is to put it in plastic bags. Everybody has their preference. But these are put in sometimes just the small plastic bags, not the sandwich size, but maybe the quart size. As they get bigger, I can put them in the gallon size. These were going to grow a little differently. When the COVID hit and they started closing down restaurants, one of the places I like to go to get my morning tea insisted on everybody had to buy a cup. They wouldn't do a refill. And I had all these cups. I thought, what am I going to do with these things? And one day I thought these fit perfectly on this. And I now have a greenhouse. So it's just an experiment, since this is a learning video. Some of the plants will be grown in their own little plastic cup terrarium, and some will have a plastic bag. Our first plant is going to be the Mexican mint marigold. Beautiful flower up here, wonderful fragrance. We don't need all this greenery at the bottom, so we're going to remove it. I'm going to make my cutting right here at this node. I tend to cut longer simply because I can always shorten it. If I cut it too short, I can't lengthen it. So I'm going to cut it right here at this node at an angle. Cutting it at an angle maximizes the surface that I can put the rooting hormone on. I don't need these leaves. I don't need these leaves because these leaves are used for photosynthesis. All I want this guy to do is grow some roots. I'll plant this plant later in a different medium, and it can grow roots. I don't want these flowers on here, even though they're incredibly beautiful, because all the energy in this plant is going to produce these flowers. I don't want flowers, I want roots. So I'm going to cut the flowers off. Maybe take off these lower leaves. Some people will encourage you to kind of scuff up the bottom here to just to encourage root growth. Some people don't. I did. I'm putting a sample of my rooting hormone in here. I don't want to put it in the entire container and contaminate the entire container, so I put it in here. I have it pre-marked. My Mexican mint marigold. I'm going to use my fancy hole digger here, put it in the ground, and there is my first cutting of a Mexican mint marigold. I'm going to put all 3 cuttings in this one pot. The soil is pre-moistened. I pre-moistened it with rainwater. Sometimes the water coming out of the tap can have chemicals and additives. It may have salts, depending if you have a water softener or whatever. Rainwater is clean, so all this has been pre-moistened with rainwater. And so I will do my cuttings, put them in there. I'll put a little bit more rainwater in it, and then I'll put the little cups on these round ones. And these are my these dry ones. I'm going to leave them alone. And so it's been about 3 to 4 weeks. I meant to check in at 2 weeks, and I just didn't. So it's been about 3 weeks since I put these cuttings in from Mexican mint marigold. And we're going to take a look to see if this looks healthy. We're going to see if it has taken any roots yet. And look at that. These were cut on October 27th, and within that amount of time, look at the roots. Good, strong roots. 1, 2 long roots and a shorter root there. You can see where the original cutting was. And so this cutting, taken at the end of October, you can see the original cutting right here. And here it has a strong root growing. This root, they even have secondary roots growing, and here's this root growing off here. So how fast do cuttings take root? Well, this Mexican mint marigold in about 3 weeks has produced some really good solid roots. What we're going to do, I'm going to put it back into I'm going to get some of the soil here. Yes, I do reuse my soil. I'm going to replant this one. We're going to make a special note on the tag that it was replanted on the 24th day of November. When I first did this plant, this is a Copper Canyon daisy, and I'll talk as I cut. Again, cut at an angle to maximize the area to be exposed to the rooting hormone. When I first tried to propagate Copper Canyon daisies, I had a very difficult time. They lasted a couple weeks and they died, and I couldn't figure out why. Then it dawned on me, I was watering them too much. Copper Canyon daisies are used to desert-like conditions. These are very drought-tolerant plants. And so it dawned on me one day that I was overwatering them. So I went out to my mother plant, took some more cuttings. This time I only watered them every other week. In watering them every other week, I made 3 or 4 new plants from that one plant. So each plant has its own needs as far as soil, its own needs as far as moisture, and that's, to me, part of the fun of learning how to propagate plants. This is the Mystic Spires. It's a Texas Superstar. It's a wonderful plant. This time of year has these beautiful flowers. This one looks a little tired because I cut it earlier for my demonstration. I don't want this, so I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to cut at an angle because that maximizes exposure to the rooting hormone. Cut off this top. I don't need these really large leaves. I could cut them off completely, but I'm going to leave them and just cut them in half. I'm going to scratch this a little bit, dip it in rooting hormone, and we're going to place it in here. This was an experiment. This is a 4-nerve daisy that just broke off. I saw it laying on the ground and I thought, you know, I'm going to try to propagate it, try to save it. And sure enough, it's saved. It has a beautiful yellow flower coming out of it, and it's grown from a little cutting to a very nice flower. It's used to growing out in the country where it's left alone. So this mixture is primarily perlite and some peat moss in it, but it's overwhelmingly perlite, and I really don't water it that much. Not all cuttings work, and there's any number of reasons, and we'll take a look at that today. Here are a couple of Copper Canyon daisies. They're cut from the same mother plant. They were cut on the same day. They're cut from similar locations on the mother plant. They were planted in the same batch of soil. They're put side by side on the heating pad together. They received the same amount of water. For some reason, this one isn't doing quite so well, and it's not going to make it. This one is a healthy Copper Canyon daisy, and next spring it'll be ready to plant into a bigger pot. What I like to do when cuttings don't make it is try to figure out why. So this one is not going to make it. So I pull it out. One thing I notice, there are no roots on this plant. For whatever reason, this plant never took root in the soil. I like to take a look at the soil. What does it feel like? Does it feel wet? Does it feel dry? This feels slightly moist. So it's not, I don't know there was so much it was overwatered, underwatered, because this one received the same amount of water. But for whatever reason, this cutting took and the other cutting did not take. This is, these are 2 Pampurier Turk's caps. This one was intentionally left outside. That's one reason the cuttings don't make it. It's in their environment. This one's been sitting outside, and in the last 3 weeks, we've had 40-degree weather, we've had 80-degree weather. It was warm and humid and misty this morning, and not too long ago it was dry. This is a sunny location, but has some shade to it. But the problem is I could not control the environment in which this cutting was growing. It was just really left at the mercy of whatever was happening. This plant was grown inside a plastic bag. These 2 plants were grown inside the plastic bag, and they're putting on new growth. So that's one reason, if you can, plant your plants in a greenhouse. If not, make a greenhouse. In this case, it was the plastic bag. This was left out to the elements. And again, let me take a look at it. It never formed any roots, and I don't know why, it just didn't. If I take a look at try to feel the soil, this soil is somewhat on the moisture side, but it's not really too wet. Part of the way to determine the moisture content of a soil is with this neat little moisture meter. As I place it in here, it says it was barely moist. This is valuable to helping to determine how much water a plant should have. Plants like the Copper Canyon daisy, you really would like to have it on the drier side. And so you see it's on the drier side. Sometimes cuttings will die because they've received too much water or not enough water, and as David Rodriguez, our county extension agent, will tell you, it's hard to tell the difference because they both have the same symptoms. So this Pampurier will go back into the bag and be allowed to grow a little bit more. Well, I hope you found that helpful, that segment on the propagation of plants through cuttings, and I'd like to sort of summarize it, maybe tie in the beginning to the end here. first thing is, as much as you can, have as sterile an environment as possible. Primarily your tools, because through whether snippers or clippers or a knife, you are cutting into the vascular system of that plant. And if you introduce a pathogen at that time, then your cuttings are just not going to make, and you may destroy the mother plant that you took the cutting from. So whether some sort of antiseptic wipes, or whether you have a container of diluted bleach or fungicide available, and have your tool sitting in there, make sure that your environment is as sanitary as possible, sterile as possible. Make sure your soil is clean. Make sure that your pots are clean. So the tools that you use. Second thing is to make sure that you know your plant. Some plants, as I gave you the example in the introduction segment, the white plumbago that I tried to propagate did not respond to my cuttings that I took, the stem cuttings. It wanted those root cuttings. All of my stem cuttings failed. All of my root cuttings took. So know your plant. If you're planting something like a copper canyon, or if you're propagating something like a copper canyon daisy, Mexican mint marigold, four-nerve daisy, those things are used to living out in the prairies, and they're growing in the rocks, and they don't need a really heavy peat, wet feet kind of soil. So know the plant that you're propagating. And as I gave the example, I just overwatered some of these plants because I just wasn't thinking. So think about where the plant grows, and then try to emulate that the best you can in your growing mediums and your growing conditions. And finally, just the technical aspect, a final review. This is going to be my sacrificial plant. All right, so I don't want the bloom because it's taking all the energy. So it comes off. This is where the photosynthesis is going to occur, but these leaves are on the large side. I don't want that much energy. I could leave just these little ones, but I'm going to just cut these in half. And the order in which you do these things really isn't important. I'm just doing this. I'm working from way top down to the bottom. You want to cut the flower off last? I don't really care. I'm simply working from top to bottom for the purpose of demonstration in this video. So the flower's been cut. The leaves are down to the right size. I want 2 nodes. There's 1 node. Here's the second node. This is going to go in the soil. So my final node, or final cut, is going to be right here. And I'm going to do it at an angle because that maximizes the amount of surface, vascular surface, that will be exposed to the rooting hormone and allowed to grow roots. I still have some left over here, and I don't want that. So here is my final cut. I'll put the rooting hormone here, and yes, these were sterilized. The rooting hormone goes here, and I will plant it that deep, and I'll show you that. The thing is, now I've kind of got this it's really kind of ugly, stocky stem thing here, so I will go ahead and cut this back down to here, and that way the plant has some sort of natural growth. We have a beautiful insect right there. So here is my cutting. The leaves cut, 1 node, 2 nodes, 3 nodes. I scraped it a little with my sterilized knife to sort of really agitate and open that area up. I dipped it very carefully in my rooting hormone. I'm not going to put this directly into the soil because that rooting hormone may come off. So I grabbed my fancy dribble here, putting a hole. I'm going to place this. That first node is completed down there. I couldn't get the second node in there, but the first node is down there because the nodes are still pretty lengthy between them. I have my tag. My tag tells me it's an indigo, and I put down that this is the 16th of April. And so that tells me when I cut it, the soil was pre-moistened with rainwater. So I'll add a little bit more rainwater to it. It's draining out the bottom, usually indication to me that the water has pretty well saturated the soil. I will put this cup on here to form its own little terrarium. I'll check back on this in a couple of days. I will really start checking up on it in about a week or so, and then hopefully by the beginning of June I will have another beautiful indigo sage to place in my landscape. I hope this segment was helpful, and I invite you to watch future segments on the propagation of plants. If you have any questions about this video, please call our Bexar County Master Gardener helpline. If you'd like more information about the Bexar County Master Gardeners Association, please look at our website. And if you'd like to know more about the Texas Master Gardener Association, then please look at their website.